You are watching Krights TV, where the truth continues.
Kids for cash. That's what authorities say was the bottom line of a diabolical plan. Even more shocking were the identities of the two men behind it.
They were men in black, men with the power to take away your freedom and your future. Jim Avila reports that they're accused of using that power to get rich. Rich on the backs of children.
I went to court and I never came home.
I was very surprised when I was being led out of the room in shackles.
They put my hands behind my back, handcuffed me, and took me right away.
Kids locked up and taken from their parents on their first, even minor offense.
I was only in front of the judge for not even 4 minutes. He barely even looked at me. He was just looking at paperwork on his desk.
Rapid fire justice.
And my son was standing next to me. When I turned around, he was gone. He was already in handcuffs and shackles at the back of the room.
Parent after parent in this one Pennsylvania courtroom, stunned, mystified by what they witnessed.
I was helpless, absolutely helpless. And to this day, I could still cry.
A mystery in Wilkes-Barre, the heart of Pennsylvania's struggling coal country. Why were so many kids in Luzerne County's juvenile court sent directly to jail and in such a rush? They all had one thing in common: the same judge, Mark Chivarella.
I was 12 years old when I got locked up. I had no clue what to say when he asked me how do I plead.
Eric Stefanski's offense? He went joyriding with his mom's car and ran over a barrier, smashing the undercarriage. No one was hurt, not even Eric. But in order to get her insurance to pay for the damage, Mom had to file a police report. The next stop, Judge Chivarella and the courtroom of absurdly swift justice.
Do you remember yourself standing in front of him?
He read me my charges and said, "How do you plead?" I didn't know what to say, so I looked at my mom and I said, "Guilty."
At 12 years old, Eric was locked up for 2 years.
How many questions did they ask you or him about his record?
Oh, none. None about his record, nothing to do with his life. None.
And what did your attorney say?
I didn't have one.
I did not think it was necessary. On his first offense, he's so young, I just didn't think that was necessary.
I had pretty good grades, but I was a cheerleader. I was in the orchestra until 9th grade. I did good in school.
Joelle Angeli's brush with the law came at age 15 after she took her grandfather's credit card and ran up a bill of a couple of $1,000s for clothes.
What happened in court?
I remember him saying this and staring right at me. "Have you ever disrespected your grandfather?"
And you were honest?
Yes, I said yes, and my grandfather was standing right next to me. He then said, "You're remanded." And they walked me out. They put me in handcuffs and shackles in a side room, sat me in a holding cell, and walked my grandfather by me as he cried.
Yeah, a little sad face. Here's one.
Jamie Trocchi was 16 when Judge Chivarella sent him away, still a boy who signed letters home with a frowning face. His offense? Underage drinking and driving, and behind in paying the fines.
I miss everything, you guys, my friends, girlfriend, house.
Heartbroken and struggling, his parents, Charles and Susan Edwards, somehow scraped up the cash.
Well, I paid every nickel. He didn't owe a penny.
When I paid him, I thought he was free to go. And the judge told me, "Are you nuts?" And they took him out in shackles.
It's not supposed to be like this in juvenile court. Incarceration is supposed to be the last resort for kids. But Marcia Levick, deputy director of the Juvenile Law Center, noticed a diabolical pattern in Judge Mark Chivarella's courtroom.
I think what we have here in Luzerne County is probably the most egregious abuse of power in the history of the American legal system.
And she had the troubling numbers to back it up.
The numbers of children going into placement in Luzerne County tended to be 2 to 3 times higher than in other counties. We have kids who were being sent to custody for things as minor as a child who shoplifted a $4 bottle of nutmeg, a child who put up a MySpace page taunting her school administrator.
Why was this happening? Levick turned her findings over to the FBI, and the answer to that question would rock Pennsylvania justice.
No comment, thank you.
Judge Chivarella and fellow Judge Michael Conahan had devised a scheme to pad their pockets on the backs of children. First, they shut down the old juvenile detention center by cutting off public funds, choking it out of existence, and then replaced it with a cash cow, a privately owned facility built by the judge's cronies for $58 million taxpayer dollars. The judges cut $2 million in secret kickbacks.
They sold their oath of offices to the highest bidders.
But there is more. The judges were not just corrupt. To keep all those new $300 a day beds filled with children, the government says Judge Chivarella did something awful, something unthinkable. Prosecutors say he sold the children into custody.
Ordered juveniles into these detention facilities despite the recommendation of juvenile probation officers that the child not be in prison.
You should be charged with child endangerment.
They are mobbed by a swarm of reporters, photographers, and parents calling them names.
Attach shackles to them and take them right off and put them away, because that's what they did to my son.
How could a judge, the beacon of trust in the American system, do such a horrid thing?
This is the new mob. This is the new mafia.
Well, they are a crime family. Chivarella and Conahan, all by their lonesome selves, they indeed shape a crime family. The old days, it was La Cosa Nostra. Maybe they'll call themselves the La Courthouse Nostra.
You're right.
Anger fills the airwaves. Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania explodes when people hear that men they elected and trusted to judge their children had profited off their incarceration, sent the kids to a private jail owned by cronies who bribed the judges. Prosecutors say they were in cahoots to then keep the jail filled with children who did not belong there. Talk radio host Steve Corbett.
Gangster judges were selling children into a prison camp. Where were the protectors of the kids at that time?
I think that we had a conspiracy of silence going on in Luzerne County.
Marcia Levick, the public interest lawyer who helped break the case.
There were officers of the court, there were members of the district attorney's office, members of probation, private lawyers, public defenders who were in the courtroom every day, and they had to know what was happening, and whether it was by virtue of intimidation or an unwillingness to get involved, the fact remains that nobody stood up.
In fact, parents say some of the court workers wrongly convinced them their children did not need lawyers.
And they basically said that, you know, I'm just going to get a slap on the wrist, that I shouldn't waste money on a lawyer.
Jamie Quinn was 14 when she was sent to Judge Mark Chivarella because of an after-school fight.
Did you hurt her badly? Did she have to go to the hospital?
No.
Was she injured?
No. I honestly expected that I was going to get lectured and get probation at the worst. And it was my first time ever in front of a judge. He didn't let me talk. I was literally in front of him for only like 4 minutes. He barely even looked at me. All I remember is my mom grabbed onto my hand and hugged me, and then they put my hands behind my back, handcuffed me, and took me right away.
Matt Klubeck did come to court with an attorney when he faced Judge Chivarella.
I had my dad's attorney representing me, but the judge told my dad's attorney that he was not able to represent me, so...
So you had an attorney, but he said no.
Right. I didn't get to tell any of my story.
Matt had been charged with assault after throwing a beefsteak during a family argument.
I was very surprised when I was being led out of the room in shackles.
But while the kids were languishing in juvenile jail, their judges spent their dirty money 1,000 miles south from chilly Wilkes-Barre in Jupiter, Florida, an enclave for the rich and famous near the homes of Tiger Woods and Celine Dion. Here at the Jupiter Marina and Yacht Club, an exclusive gated community, the judges partnered in a waterfront condo, now up for sale, worth more than $750,000. One of their cronies docked his 56-foot yacht, the Real Justice, here in Slip 50, now empty. We wanted to ask Judge Chivarella about all these charges, but he refused to be interviewed, so we went to him.
Hello, Judge. I'm Jim Avila from ABC News 2020. How are you doing?
Good, thanks. Hang on, I'll call you back.
You know, a lot of people are wondering how a man of such distinction like yourself could have gotten in so much trouble and sold these kids down the river.
Well, let's stop right there. Didn't sell any kids down the river.
I showed him in black and white what the U.S. attorney had charged, that he sentenced kids for cash.
It's not what you think it means. Go talk to the juvenile people in Luzerne County and you will understand what that means.
This doesn't mean that you got improper money for placing juvenile offenders into PA childcare.
Yes, that's what it says. We came to a plea agreement because we would never agree that that was improper. And that's why in the plea agreement you don't see any of that language. I'm not pleading guilty to anything relative to cash for kids, embezzlement, extortion, quid pro quo. Absolutely not.
You didn't take any time with these kids. You didn't let them have an attorney.
Oh, that's not true. That's not true. So what happens in juvenile court is there's a whole intake process. And based upon that intake process, information is provided to the intake people. They're the ones that make the recommendations to me as to where the child should be placed. And based on that information, I place that child, or I don't place that child, depending upon what they want to do.
Now, we've talked to several kids in your community.
I was literally in front of him for only like 4 minutes.
I never was able to speak.
And they all had 30-second court hearings like me.
And what they describe as to what happened in your courtroom is pretty amazing.
You take a look at their file and you look to see if this was the first time they had a run-in with the law. Might have been the first time they were in front of me. You may be surprised that it's not going to be as clear-cut as they would like you to think.
Are you seeing that to be true?
No.
In fact, Judge Arthur Grimm, a Pennsylvania juvenile judge himself, now assigned to review Judge Chivarella's cases, has seen just the opposite.
That kids were in there for relatively minor first-time offenses and ended up being placed. The judge is incorrect.
And what of Chivarella's rapid-fire justice?
Is that the way the juvenile system is supposed to work?
No, it's not the way it's supposed to work. I'm seeing cases which seem to take in the neighborhood of 1.5 minutes to 3 minutes. That simply is not the way to do business. It doesn't happen in 3 minutes.
And what about Chivarella's claim that his trials were so short because he looked at the intake people's reports first and followed their lead?
The day of the hearing or the day of the admission, it's already determined what's going to happen.
Judge Grimm says that's exactly backwards. Hear the case, then read the sentencing recommendations.
You have no business reading those reports. You don't want to be tainted by somebody else's impression of a child. You want to try the case based on the facts.
The two corrupt judges have pled guilty to being secretly on the tape. And now the state Supreme Court, just yesterday, authorized Judge Grimm to begin healing the wounds of the children whose rights he found were routinely violated by expunging the records of as many as 5,000 children sent away to juvenile jail by Judge Chivarella, many of whom have taken their cases to the Juvenile Law Center for a massive civil suit.
I felt like I was branded as something. I was in jail as a freshman in high school, so I never went back to school.
So now at 19, instead of being in college, what are you doing?
Nothing.
Eric is back in school and hoping to get his driver's license.
You're not going to do nothing wrong, are you?
No.
No.
But like Joel, he's had trouble adjusting.
I don't talk to anybody. I don't have many friends because I can't trust a lot of people.
Matt works after school at a restaurant, but dreams of joining the Air Force after college.
That's what I really want to do. I want to be able to fly jets.
It's a hobby that takes him away from the troubled memory of jail at 14.
And that helped a lot because when I'm flying the planes, I'm in control of everything. Nothing else matters.
Still, Matt fears his conviction may keep him out of the Air Force. As for Jamie's dream,
right now I'm still in high school. I graduate this year, and I want to study criminal justice.
And just recently, Jamie picked up her college application.
Thank you so much.
Good luck to you, Jamie. So you're going to study criminal justice in hopes of improving the system?
Yes. I've seen a lot of bad stuff happen. It makes me really question people who we're supposed to trust. I don't want it to ever happen again.
We've seen corruption cases around the country in every state. What's different about this case that concerns you?
It's kids. Yeah. I'm sorry. It really, damn it. It really upsets me because it's on the back of kids. And that's unfair. Kids are malleable, but Talk about a bad lesson.
Concerning her son. This way.
The fallout continues from Mark Chivarella's corruption trial. A federal jury convicted the former Luzerne County judge on 12 charges. Tonight we learned there will be a thorough investigation into some current employees in the Luzerne County courthouse because of what was revealed at the trial.
Well, Scott, Luzerne County's president judge says this is all about keeping people's confidence in courts. So an investigation has been started into 2 current Luzerne County workers. Mark Chivarella is now a convicted felon. During a federal trial in Scranton, he was found guilty of racketeering and other charges in connection with a kickback scheme connected to private juvenile detention centers. During the ex-judge's trial, there was testimony from one current Luzerne County court employee. Nick Callan, once a tip staff to former Judge Michael Conahan. On the stand, Callan told jurors he delivered packages to former Judge Conahan, but said he did not know what was inside them. Prosecutors say the packages contained money, and Conahan has pleaded guilty to racketeering. Callan now works as a tip staff to senior judges in Luzerne County. Prosecutors also mentioned another current Luzerne County court employee, a court stenographer, who they said took money from Conahan. That woman did not testify. Because of the information, Luzerne County's president judge has ordered an investigation into those employees. In a statement, he calls it, quote, a personnel matter to ascertain whether there is a basis for disciplinary action. Starting next month, Senior Judge Brendan Vanston of Wyoming County will review the matter and then make a recommendation to court. And Judge Vanston's recommendation will be considered by the judges here in Luzerne County before a final decision is made on any possible disciplinary action.
This is not a cash for kids case, and we hope somebody starts getting the message.
My kid's not here anymore. My kid's not here. He's dead because of him. He ruined my fucking life. I'd like him to go to hell and rot there forever. No, you know what he told everybody in court? They need to be held accountable for their actions. You need to be. Do you remember me? Do you remember me? Do you remember my son? An all-star wrestler? He's gone. He's gone himself in the heart. You scumbag. You ruined my fucking life! Somebody better do something with him!
You still get your pension?
Where are you, old man?
Back now at 7:36 with what some are calling the biggest courthouse scandal in U.S. history. 2 judges in Pennsylvania convicted in a so-called cash for kids scheme, and now one mother says her son died because of one of those judges. We're going to talk to her in just a moment, but first, NBC's Jeff Rawson has details now. Hey, Jeff. Good morning.
Hi, Ann. Good morning to you. That judge sent hundreds of kids to jail for minor crimes while taking kickbacks from the jail itself. This morning, he's been convicted along with another judge, But that wasn't enough for one of the victim's mothers, who confronted him outside of court. The dramatic scene caught on tape. Sandy Fonzo couldn't hold back, face to face with the judge, the man she blames for her son's death. Ed Kenzakowski was only 17 years old, arrested for a minor drug crime, his first offense. Judge Michael Chivarella sentenced Ed to 6 months in a juvenile detention center, according to legal experts, an unusually strict punishment. He served the time, but his mother says he was never the same after he got out. Years later, Ed committed suicide.
He was just a regular 17-year-old happy kid. You know, we had a regular, normal, happy life. Then that one incident that we had to go stand in front of that judge was a turning point. He shackled him, took him away, and that was the end.
Prosecutors say Judge Chivarella was secretly cashing in as he sent kids to jail, taking kickbacks of nearly $1 million from the company that ran the jail. When Sandy Fonzo saw him after court, she let loose.
The bottom line is that his greed took the life of my son. I don't think there's anything worse than what he could have done. The pain that he created and the lies and the deceit and everything behind it, I mean, it just makes me sick.
Chivarella was convicted on 12 of 39 counts, including racketeering and money laundering. Plus, he has to return all the money.
Absolutely never took a dime to send a kid anywhere. If that was the case, that would have been in this trial. You don't think the government would have put me on trial for that if that was the case? Never happened. Never, ever happened.
He faces up to 157 years in prison, but this morning, he's home with his family until sentencing. A freedom Sandy Fonzo finds outrageous.
I know it won't bring my son back, but I just want an apology from him. I want him to say that he was wrong and that he is sorry. I just want him to admit his guilt, finally.
We called Chivarella and his lawyer about Sandy's accusations. They declined to comment. By the way, another judge, Michael Conahan, is also involved in this kickback scheme. He's pled guilty now to racketeering. Both could be sentenced in a matter of months. Ann?
All right, Jeff Rawson, thank you so much. Sandy Fonzo is with us along with her attorney, Marsha Levitt. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
You were just watching that tape as we showed it, and it didn't seem as though yelling gave you any peace. It's as if you're really in this knot of pain.
I think it was good for me to be there at that moment and actually, you know, speak right to him and tell him right to his face the pain that he's created and what he's done to my son. So maybe, you know, when everything calms down, it'll feel like maybe a layer has come off. I mean, this has been years and years of, and it's still, there's just no closure to him. I just want to see him, you know, I just want to see some justice. I want to see some justice for these kids, and, you know, I want to know my life's son was not in vain. My son's death was not in vain.
You, more than perhaps anyone else, can really express how this sentence affected your son, how this judge's sentence affected your son. How would you describe it?
He changed him. He ripped him out of our home, out of our life. He never looked into, you know, the whole picture of the kids. Like I said, he lined them up one by one, and he sent them away, shackled them, sent them to places that, you know, God knows what went on, and then he throws them back. And how does a kid deal with that? You know, my son just never recovered from it. No matter what we did, he just never would let him go. It just kept snowballing and snowballing. And
I have to ask, you know that suicide is a very complicated thing. There are a lot of factors. Were there other factors that led to your son's committing suicide?
It was like his spirit was no longer, he wasn't the same kid. He didn't have all that, you know, that energy. He was depressed, he was sad, he was...
So you saw no other factors that may have contributed?
No, it just kept going. He lost his freedom, he was locked up, he was fine until he got him again, and then it just kept going downhill. That's all. He just never could recover, and it was just, you know, even when he did hear that, you know, Chivarella was indicted and that this was, Mom, it'll never happen. He'll never go to jail. He'll never pay for what he did. And I think he just lost hope. And he started drinking, and, so all of that played a role in that one devastating night. I don't know, but that was the only thing bad that ever happened in his life, and it's the only thing that ever had any kind of significance on changing his whole personality and his whole outlook on life and his. I don't know. It just seemed like he lost hope. He lost faith. He believed that there was no justice. There was no, he was the bad one. This judge. I want these kids to all know that they were not the bad ones. That he's the bad guy. He was in.
Marcia, what do you hope to get for these children? You've filed suit on their behalf.
We filed suit on their behalf, and we have worked to expunge their records, to reverse their convictions. And I think that really Sandy Sun's story typifies what happened to so many of the children in Luzerne County, thousands of children who were pulled before Chivarella for very, very trivial misconduct, joyriding, possession of drug paraphernalia, minor harassment kinds of charges, shoplifting. They appeared without lawyers. They had hearings that lasted 2 or 3 minutes. They were handcuffed and shackled and led off to placements. And I think that the story of Sandy Sun is tragic in ways that none of us can even imagine. But the kind of trauma that all of the kids and families experienced up there as a consequence of the corruption and criminality that was ongoing and this widespread violation of children's constitutional rights is just really extraordinary.
When you talk about wanting an apology, Sandy, it's hard to even imagine how that might affect you, if that's enough for you.
Yeah. No, I could never forgive him. I mean, my son is gone. I'll never have him back. But for him to just finally admit his guilt and stand up there and just say, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry to all these people, and that I was wrong, and, give these kids a little bit of healing and a little bit of, faith in our system that, the right sometimes can be done, and that they are not, these kids, the stories that I'm getting, they're just horrifying, and they need help. They need help.
In all your loss, clearly you're speaking so forthrightly about your son. His life mattered.
Yes.
You've made that very clear today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being
you.
here. Thank you so much, Marcia, for being here today.
There was a Pennsylvania judge that recently got 28 years in prison for selling kids to a private prison. They was giving him kickbacks for the sentences he was putting on these children. Let me go ahead and roll the clip.
Stunning story out of Pennsylvania where the Supreme Court there has just thrown out thousands and thousands of juvenile convictions issued by a judge who's been caught up in a corruption scandal. His name is Judge Mark Chivarella, and he has now admitted to accepting millions of dollars in kickbacks in exchange for sending kids to private detention centers. The court says that none of these young offenders basically got a fair hearing. Some of them weren't even allowed to have lawyers during their hearings. So what happens to them and what happens to these cases? Marcia Levick is here. She's Deputy Director and Chief Counsel at the Juvenile Law Center. She represents the juveniles in these cases. What's been the reaction, Marcia?
Well, the reaction across the board is really stunning. I think that both the families, the kids, and the community is overwhelmed by what is really an unprecedented result in an unprecedented case.
In terms of what happens then to these cases, I assume that we're talking about 6,500 cases, just so our viewers know, or thereabouts. I assume that a fair number of these kids were actually guilty in these cases. What happens to them? Do they get retried?
The vast majority of these kids, first of all, won't get retried. I wouldn't assume that so many of these kids were guilty. More than half of these kids appeared without lawyers. These were hearings that took place in about a minute and a half. The judge made summary, arbitrary decisions about these kids, and they were denied the most fundamental rights of due process. So these kids are really getting the opportunity to get their lives back on track and to erase what happened to them.
You're right. I guess we can't make any assumptions in this case because, as the court has said, there really was no fair system and no justice. I know that you're suing for damages. Who and what are you suing?
Well, we're suing the judges, and we're also suing the private provider who ran these facilities that gave the kickbacks to the judges. We are suing the developer of these facilities, the Luzerne County itself, for their conduct in this. So we are hoping to get compensation for these kids and families who, as I said, not only suffered violations of their due process rights, but many of these kids and families paid fines and restitution, really paid money back to the juvenile court as a result of being found delinquent. So we're hoping for a victory there as well.
Real quickly, I understand, though, that the judge and another one involved in this case, though, they've asked for immunity.
The judges have asked for immunity, and we think that this is, again, just an extraordinary situation where you have judges really acting outside the bounds of the Constitution, and we are hopeful that the federal court will not grant them immunity in these cases.
Marshall Levitt, good of you to be here, Marshall. Thank you. And just so our viewers know, we did try contacting Judge Ciavarella through his attorney. We were told, though, because of the pending criminal ruling in this case, and he's also obviously got some civil legal issues as well, that they would not.
What many of you don't realize, the prison system in America is becoming more and more privatized. The corporations are making a lot of money off of prisoners. And the reason why they're making money off of prisoners is because they have them in there doing slave labor, only making 50 cents to, at the most, maybe 90 cents a day. They work these men, women, and children all day long. So they're getting a great profit off of people. So what they're doing, as in this particular case, this judge just got caught. But how many other judges are just passing out this time so they can put them in the private prisons and they getting all kind of financial kickbacks off of it? It explains a lot why a lot of people are getting this extended amount of time for hardly nothing. Because it's all a money racket so the corporations can make money off of prisoners. You know, see, this corruption that's going on in the government level is sick. It's wrong. If a person do wrong, give them a fair trial with proper representation and follow the Constitution and law to the fullest. That's all people want. But no, people like this guy want to make kickbacks off of corporations. It's sick how the corporations are doing the people. Throwing people's kids in jail for long periods of time just so they can get slave labor off of them. Or men and women as well. It doesn't make a bit of sense. The corporations in America is the enemy. Not the black, white, Hispanic, and all this other stuff. The corporations use racism through politics to divide the people, but the corporation is the beast. That's the beast in this country. They control everything. They control the politicians. They control the police. They control it all. Always remember this. They bail them out, but they'll never bail you out. Why? Because they take care of them. But what y'all think about this particular story? Show you how sick society is, and thank you for the brother that sent it to me. Hit me up in the comments and future commentary, subscribe to the YouTube channel. But as you can see in the video, it's not just a black people thing, like the stereotype. Black people eat chicken. Not a lot of black people eat chicken at all. So they want to interview him. They don't want to interview you. He's more relevant. You're not. I mean, you had your little time to shine.
Whoa. We're coming out. We're going to stand here. We're going to stand here. We're not running or anything, okay? One question at a time.
How do you feel, Al?
We're amazed. The jury rejected 95% of the government's case. They obviously did not believe Robert Powell. They obviously did not believe Jill Moran. They rejected a large portion of the case, even with regards to Robert Miracle. They rejected most of the theories regarding kickbacks and bribes. The government really got hurt today on this entire case. And it stands for the proposition that what Mark Ciavarella said all along was true. He never took a kickback, he never took a bribe, and he never extorted Robert Powell. And the government affirmed him on all three things. This is not a cash for kids case, and we hope somebody starts getting the message.
My kid's not here anymore. My kid's not here. He's dead because of him. He ruined my fucking life. I'd like him to go to hell and rot there forever. No, you know what he told everybody in court? They need to be held accountable for their actions. You need to be. Do you remember me? Do you remember me? Do you remember my son? An all-star wrestler? He's gone. He shot himself in the heart. You scumbag! You ruined my fucking life! Hold on. Somebody better do something with him! He's going home to his pregnant daughter!
It's a hard jail sentence, Mark. What's in your mind right now?
No public's waiting for you, boss.
Say something.
I'll come get you.
I got nothing to say.
Next month, I'll come see you.
Mark, how do you feel? I mean, how do you feel right now? This.
Mark, no kids for cash. What do you say about that?
He never took a dime to send a kid anywhere. If that was the case, that would have been in this trial. You don't think the government would have put me on trial for that if that was the case? Never happened. Never, ever happened. This case was about extortions and kickbacks. That's what this case was about, not about kids for cash. Because if it was, they'd have had that on trial.
Mark, you were convicted of racketeering and serious charges. What do you have to say about that?
Sorry.
Gaggle of reporters.
Oh.
The government's case was largely disproven.
I have no idea.
You still face some jail time. How do you?
We're going to deal with that. My lawyers will talk to you about that. I have nothing to say.
You know, there's a parent who's really upset here. What would you say to the parents who've been upset?
I don't know what the facts or the circumstances are concerning her son.
Fowler. This way.
No, excuse me.
Can't find your phone?
I should have just walked to the car. It would have been easier. Watch yourself. You're going to knock over the cameras. A lot of lights, a lot of cameras.
What's next?
Talk to my lawyer. Okay.
Mark, 151 months in jail. It's still quite a long time. That's the minimum to face according to prosecutor.
Very long time. Well, I got it. Surprised and chagrined because I didn't understand how I could be guilty of a kickback from Robert Miracle when he testified he never gave me a kickback.
You still going to fight the charges against you now?
Absolutely.
Well, Mark, some would say this is not about Robert Miracle. It's about a former judge who's still convicted of racketeering. What would you want to say to that?
We'll wait until we see what happens on appeal.
You still get your pension? You still get your pension? Where are you, old man?
Well, with over 2 million people in jail, the US has the world's biggest prison population. But some are seeing the inside of a cell because dodgy judges are getting payback from the private sector. RT's Gaine Chichikan reports on those dishing out justice for a fee.
2 Pennsylvania judges have made a killing out of juvenile prisons. Mark Chivarella and Michael Conahan were convicted of receiving kickbacks for more than $2 million from the developers of several private detention centers. But the real crime, according to parents, is that these judges then sent more than 5,000 children to those very facilities for crimes as small as fighting on a school bus or posting a parody of their teacher on the web.
My kid's not here. He's dead because of him. He ruined my life. Do you remember me? Do you remember my son? An all-star wrestler? He's gone. He shot himself in the heart.
Sandy Fonzo's 17-year-old son, Edward, was a budding student and sportsman when he was arrested at an underage party. Judge Chivarella locked him up for 6 months. Shortly after he got out, Edward committed suicide.
He never looked into, the whole picture of the kids. Like I said, he lined them up one by one and he sent them away, shackled them, sent them to places that, God knows what went on, and then he throws them back. And how does a kid deal with that? My son just never recovered from it.
Eric Stefanski was 12 when Judge Chivarella sent him to jail for 2 years for scratching his mom's car while joyriding. Or this young man, who as a teenager was locked up for months for throwing a piece of steak at his mom's boyfriend.
I really couldn't believe that being accused of something like throwing a steak was all that was needed to be put away.
The case of the 2 Pennsylvania judges in bed with local private prisons could be just the tip of the iceberg. A recent report revealed America's largest prison corporations pour hundreds of thousands into the campaigns of governors, state legislators, and judges in the hope of advancing their agenda. And it seems to be working. The number of private prisons in the U.S. is growing rapidly.
All of their money, every penny they get, is a taxpayer dollar that they get from the government.
And so what they do is they get the money from the government to house prisoners. Then they turn around and spend some of that money by giving it back to the politicians that push the laws and the policies that lead to both more people being incarcerated and more people being incarcerated in private prisons. So it's almost a money laundering of tax dollars.
They're making contributions to judges in electoral politics. It's sort of like a closed circuit. You're making contributions to people who are making the laws, and then you're making contributions to people who are enforcing the law.
With the number of prisons, up goes the number of prisoners. The U.S. has around 2.3 million people behind bars.
We've seen prison populations pretty consistently over the last 3 decades can move up a couple % a year. And, unfortunately, as a citizen, that's not the most exciting statistic. However, when you look at it from a business model perspective for the private operators, it's clearly good news.
The good news for the prison business turned into a nightmare for thousands of underage victims of the 2 judges in Pennsylvania.
There's an incentive in private industry, obviously, to make money. That's what private industry is for. So there's an incentive to have more prisoners, an incentive to keep those prisoners incarcerated for longer periods of time. There's really no incentive for rehabilitation. The incentives are reversed.
The so-called Cash for Kids case in Pennsylvania showed just how reversed the incentives can be, and raised the question, with judges actually interested in sending people away for longer terms and keeping their benefactors' private prisons full, what justice can one count on? I'm Ganesh Chakyan reporting from Washington, RT.
Hi everyone, I'm Girl Writes What, and I just wanted to start off today by thanking everyone who's written to me in private messages to encourage me to keep doing what I'm doing. And telling me a bit about their lives and experiences. I don't always have the opportunity to answer every single message. Sometimes I get so many that some of them just get lost way down in the shuffle. But I do read them all, every single one of them, and they all really matter to me. And I want to encourage you all to keep sending them and keep helping me stay motivated. It amazes me how heartfelt and genuine so many of those messages have been, how much it seems to mean to a lot of you that someone like me is talking about all this stuff. And I really appreciated the flurry of don't lose hopes after my last bummed out video. It really helped to lift my spirits a lot. I also wanted to thank the few people who've sent me donations, give them an extra shout out. Some of those donations have just been stunning in their generosity and completely unexpected. And really, they're so appreciated. And I wanted to give an even bigger shout out to those of you who shared a bit of their lives with me, along with their financial support. It really matters to me. The donations help me free up the time I need to make these videos and to write about all of these issues. And it's really all the personal stories and messages that I get that motivate me to keep thinking about these things and to want to keep doing what I'm doing. So just thanks for all of that. Now to business. I wanted to talk today a bit more about why I think society in general seems just so reluctant to tolerate men's rights, men standing up for themselves, their rights and their interests, and how our collective views of gender inform our responses to these things. I'm going to start off, relating a little story. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked by Harry Krights, president of the NCFM, to travel to Montana and speak at a symposium and recruitment meeting for Montana State University's new NCFM chapter. I took a week off work. I drove down. I prepared a presentation touching on the new rules for adjudicating sexual misconduct cases on campuses across the U.S., rules that really take a sledgehammer to concepts like due process and burden of proof. and that are extremely impactful on men's lives regardless of whether they result in criminal sanctions or simply being expelled from school. The chapter head, Chris Thompson, had been putting up posters, giving presentations at some of the frat houses, explaining to men why they should join the chapter, what kind of services and resources were available at and through NCFM, and why they really needed to start looking out for their rights. He'd had a lot of positive feedback from those frat members, though when in public they tended to really talk in hushed voices about it. We set up our conference room at the local library, got the PowerPoint ready to go, and nobody showed up other than the reporter for the local NBC affiliate. She was a trooper. She decided to do a story posing the question of why no one would show up. And to her credit, it was really an unbiased story, and she seemed very sympathetic to a lot of the issues that we talked about. Things like job deaths, rates of suicide and homelessness, underrepresentation in post-secondary, and really sympathetic to the obstacles that are involved in getting any sort of advocacy done for these issues. One thing, out of about 100 posters that went up around campus to advertise the event, all but 2 were ripped down within a day. These weren't posted in places that were inappropriate. They were posted on public bulletin boards, places where everybody advertises their events, garage sales, selling cars or furniture. They were not in inappropriate places, and yet they were torn down. Businesses were requested to post the posters in their windows, and they refused, unanimously. All of them refused, citing a need to remain neutral. Even though campus feminist organizations use those same windows to advertise their events, the few men who talked to Chris in public kept their voices down, and they obviously did not want to be seen as interested in a men's organization or in their own rights. I was quoted in the news story that there is a strong, strong social condemnation of men standing up for themselves, that they're supposed to stand up for other people, but not for themselves. And I think the public resistance inherent in businesses refusing outright to post ads for a men's symposium, posters being torn down, and the feverish glee that you see in places like Shit Reddit Says or Man Boobs over the MSU event only proves that that social condemnation exists in spades. Especially since both the Shit Reddit Says crowd and Man Boobs, David Futrell, have repeatedly stated that the men's rights movement is an impotent movement with no relevant issues, comprised of losers who live in basements and can't get girlfriends. I mean, one would think that if the MRM had no relevant issues and consisted of ineffectual people, no one would be bothered wasting any breath criticizing them or socially sabotaging their events. For whatever reason, I've become something of a target of criticism and hostility from these people. SRS has multiple dossier-style posts filled with quotes they've mined from my online conversations going back months, and they've even gone so far as to mine quotes from other websites to post on a subreddit devoted to unacceptable things said on Reddit. That's really a lot of time and energy to devote toward discrediting people you believe have no issues to speak of anyway, and who could never generate any kind of public support. And because of that, I'm constantly coming across people who attribute things to me that I've never said. And when I ask them to direct me to where exactly I said that, it's inevitably revealed that they heard it from someone else. And this just stinks of a campaign, an active campaign to discredit me, to discredit the movement, a movement that they believe does a good enough job of discrediting themselves. So I don't understand the mentality there. Or at least I didn't until I started thinking a little further. Given all of this stuff that I've mentioned, the resistance of regular people to support men's rights causes, even in uncontroversial ways, and the intensity of this feminist spearheaded campaign to discredit and misrepresent and silence a group they profess is impotent and irrelevant in the first place. All of this got me thinking about how it is that feminism managed to gain the steam it did, despite being ostensibly against all established social norms, and become the benefactors of so much public tolerance, despite the kind of hate speech that was common to academic and literary icons of the second wave, like Mary Daly and Andrea Dworkin, and writings like the Scum Manifesto. Especially since men advocating to end something like circumcision can come up against some extreme hostility and even accusations of being insensitive or anti-woman, if they don't preface every commentary with 1,000 words describing how female genital mutilation is a much more harmful practice, even though it sometimes isn't. One can't advocate for accuracy in informing the public as to the true nature of intimate partner violence, how half its victims are men, and how the system leaves both them and their children twisting in the wind, without being called a misogynist. David Futrell, Man Boobs himself, has characterized the MRM's efforts in this area as an agenda to dismantle existing protections for women. In his mind, we don't want to direct state funds toward battered men's shelters or toward providing equal access to existing shelters. We want to tear down battered women's shelters. And when you ask for proof of this, he's got nothing but his belief. So how is it that advocating to end circumcision or to provide domestic violence services to male victims, how can that be seen as anti-woman? I'm coming to the conclusion that anyone who fights for is also perceived, whether it's accurate or not, to be fighting against. And when there's a gender binary with men on one side and women on the other, fighting for women as a group is going to be perceived as fighting against men, and vice versa. This didn't pose much of an obstacle for feminists. They had a lot of gendered perceptions working in their favor, all of which made their attacks on men and masculinity, which have frequently been much more vicious and overt than anything from even the icons of the men's rights movement, palatable to society's collective consciousness. Keep in mind, these perceptions that I'm talking about have existed long before feminism, pretty much forever. Our collective perceptions of gender tell us that female violence and hostility are either non-existent, essentially harmless, or excusable. They tell us that men are powerful, threatening, and potentially dangerous. They tell us women are the appropriate benefactors of society's protection, help, and support, and that men are the appropriate objects for absorption of violence and harm. Our perceptions tell us that women are objects that are acted upon, and that men are agents who act upon others and the environment. Those collective perceptions of men and women only facilitated every one of feminism's efforts. Their demands for suffrage, equal rights, and protection under the law, even the extraordinary measures they've demanded to protect women from harm, all of those demands dovetailed beautifully with our perception that giving women what they need is beneficial and appropriate. Those perceptions also facilitated feminism's ability to demonize masculinity and are responsible for society's ability to tolerate the levels of hate and violent fantasy found in, say, the Scum Manifesto, since we perceive the hostility of women and their proxies to be harmless and excusable. And the groups such writings target are, in our perceptions, not only powerful and potentially dangerous, but the appropriate objects for the absorption of violence and hostility. These perceptions also allowed feminism to essentially rewrite history, to craft a palatable and believable lie as to the nature of society in the past. For example, their claim that domestic violence against women was traditionally socially acceptable. This claim ignores easily accessible facts, such as laws on the law books against wife battering, which provided for punishments ranging from chain gangs to public flogging, that have been on the books since at least the early 1800s, reported incidences of vigilante justice against battering husbands that included lynching, and newspaper reports of convictions and sentences going back at least to the early 1800s. At the same time, utter falsehoods appear not only on blogs and in media opinion pieces, but in feminist textbooks written by scholars such as Domestic Violence Law, 2nd edition, which according to Berkeley Law School is or was the premier textbook on the subject. That book brazenly states that the rule of thumb, described as a law limiting a man's right to beat his wife to sticks no wider than his thumb, was attributed to an emperor of Rome who never existed, Romulus, son of the god Mars, and from mythology, and claims that this law was perpetuated in English common law and throughout Europe, even though no such laws have ever been found to exist. Even when the lie was pointed out to them, they did not change it in the printing of their next edition. These are easy lies to believe. Men are powerful and potentially dangerous agents who act upon others, while women are seen as objects at the mercy of outside forces and who require protection. They're easy lies to tell, even by those who know they're false, because there is no socially or instinctively ingrained taboo against attacking men. There never has been. In fact, the absorption of violence and hostility is a man's natural place in the scheme of things. These perceptions are what lead people to try to justify a woman beating a man in public by assuming he must have done something to deserve it. Men are dangerous, women are harmless. Men are the appropriate targets of violence, and men act while women are acted upon. In order to maintain these perceptions, especially the agent-object dichotomy, we will actually manufacture justifications for such a woman to turn her action into a reaction to some hypothetical action on his part. I bet he was cheating on her. To force the situation to comply with our instinctive internal gendered narrative. So when feminism fights for women, even when its representatives are actively and hostilely attacking and doing harm to men in order to do that, most people see those attacks as harmless and reactive rather than active. Attacks aimed at a group whose natural role is to absorb them. And the moment feminists constructed out of whole cloth their elaborate justification, namely patriarchy theory, everything they told us complied with what our instincts were already telling us, and all just seemed right with the world. It's that desperate desire that exists in most of us to recharacterize all female action, especially hostility and violence, as reactive, that left society wide open to the snake oil of patriarchy theory and feminist ideas of male privilege and gender oppression of women. Here were feminists, angry and hostile and hating on men, and the rest of us did what people do when they see a woman beating on a man. We seize on an excuse. Well, he must have done something to deserve it, and it must have been horrible too. And there was patriarchy theory to explain it all. So many people have swallowed patriarchy theory because if men hadn't always been oppressive assholes, then feminists wouldn't have a reason to be so angry at men in the first place. And the first thing we will always look for when women act in that way is what exactly they're reacting to. Patriarchy theory was the tasty, tasty rationalization most of society gobbled up to explain the overt hostility of second-wave feminists toward males, and feminism's ever-increasing advancement of women's interests at the expense of everybody else. If those ladies are hating on men and pushing to spend ever more public dollars to protect and support women, productive or dysfunctional, well, they obviously have a damn good reason, right? They're obviously reacting to some injustice, and the most obvious place to look for that injustice is in the public sphere actors who occupy the other side of the gender binary. Just like that man who's getting a beat down from his girlfriend down the sidewalk, men as a group must have done something horrible to deserve all this. And now let's flip things on their head and take a look at how our perceptions of men and women inform society's reaction to the men's rights movement. If men are fighting for men as a group, then who are they fighting against? The most obvious answer is women, the people on the other side of the gender binary, and this is the first place our knee-jerks will lead us. Even if MRAs confine their condemnation to feminism, feminism is women by proxy, and the perceived stench of misogyny remains. And women are not the appropriate objects for the absorption of violence and hostility in our collective perceptions. They are, in fact, the appropriately protected class. To the majority of society, men fighting for men as a group feels on a visceral level dangerously close to a man kicking the shit out of a woman. And because she is an object rather than an agent, she can't possibly have done anything to deserve it. Because men are seen as agents who act upon the world, society is more interested in focusing on suppressing the acting out, rather than exploring any of the causes for it. Because we perceive men as appropriately placing the well-being of others before their own, they appear churlish and immature when they prioritize their own interests. Because they're perceived as powerful, they're assumed to not be subject to any hardship they shouldn't just be able to overcome or weather as men, or wave their hands and make it go away. And patriarchy theory, which posits that men created society in such a way as to oppress women for the benefit of men, means you can always blame all of men's problems, no matter where they come from, and no matter how horrible they are. Well, you can blame them on men. When women are oppressed, it's men's fault. When men are oppressed, it's their own fault. I mean, men are in all the positions of real power, so if there were any real problems for men, those guys would be on it. After all, they constructed patriarchy just to benefit men at the expense of women, right? Except there is no evidence to back that up, to back up the claim that men in power will act in the interests of men or at the expense of women, or that they even act in men's interests at all. In fact, there's evidence that demonstrates that the opposite is true. A 2004 study of gender differences in automatic in-group bias found that men lack a mechanism that bolsters automatic own-group preference. Only women showed this bias in all 4 experiments, and in 3 of them, all subjects, male and female, showed a strong bias toward women, which is a horrifying thing to me, because it shows that women in power will usually act strongly in the interests of women, while men in power exhibit no own group preference at all, but will act more often than not in the interests of women as well. Society has been well and truly conned by feminism's pathological lying. We've been duped by our own instinctive perceptions of men and women, and our own internal biases that serve women's interests over those of men. And we've managed to vilify, shortchange, disadvantage, and marginalize half our population in doing so. In the UK alone, shifts in social and education policy have rendered 20% of men under 25 officially unemployable. Not unemployed, unemployable. And no one seems to want to do anything but wonder what the hell is wrong with boys that they're dropping out of school. If and when we ever snap out of this cognitive coma and see the damage we've done in our slavery to appease the ravenous female at the expense of men, families, social cohesion, and even children, we'd really better hope that men aren't so marginalized, damaged, uneducated, impoverished, unemployable, and apathetic to pick up the shovels and help us start digging ourselves out. But frankly, the longer it goes, the less likely they're going to be able to help us when it all falls apart. Anyhow, that's not all I have to say about that issue, but this is a long video, and long enough already, and I got things to do with a kid coming home for lunch, so I'm going to say see you later. Thanks again to everybody who's kept me motivated and helped me do this. And I guess that's it for now. Bye.